Serah Finch had survived 26 years without a heat. She had watched other women bloom, watched them lose 3 days to fever and longing, watched alphas appear at their doors like they had been called, watched bonds form in the space of a single night that rearranged entire lives. She had held Lydia's hand through her second cycle. She had brewed tea for Pearl McGraw when the fever climbed too high. She had sat beside Clara Voss in the dark and said nothing, because sometimes nothing was the only honest thing left to say. And through all of it, every cycle, every bloom, every bond, Serah's body had stayed quiet. The village elders called her hollow. The women called her cursed. Serah called herself free. She had built a life in that freedom, a small cottage with her name on the lease, a scribe's contract with the Dunvale Council that paid her enough to eat well and save carefully, a routine that belonged entirely to her, early mornings at the archive, late evenings by her own fire, the particular satisfaction of a life that asked nothing from anyone and owed nothing in return. She was not lonely. She told herself this so consistently and with such conviction that she had almost stopped noticing the moments when it wasn't quite true. The night everything changed, she was at her desk. Summit banners were going up outside her window. She could hear the hammering, or the shouting of men hoisting heavy fabric in the dark, the low rumble of approaching horses on the ridge road. The Royal Convergence Summit came to Dunvale every 3 years, and every 3 years Serah spent the week copying delegation records and pretending not to notice how the whole town rearranged itself around the visiting lords. Her candle was burning low. Her fingers were ink-stained. The treaty she was copying was 17 pages long and deeply uninteresting. Then the warmth started. The small, central, easy to dismiss as the fire behind her, or the tea she had drunk an hour ago, or simple fatigue after a long day. She dismissed it, kept writing. The warmth grew. It spread from her sternum outward, slow, then faster, then all at once, until her skin felt like something she was wearing too tightly. She set her pen down, pressed both hands flat on the desk, breathed through her nose. The warmth became a wave. It rolled through her without warning or mercy, as Serah knocked her inkwell sideways, scrambling to her feet. Black ink bled across 17 pages of border treaties. She did not care. Her body had become something unfamiliar, too aware, too sensitive, the brush of her own sleeve against her wrist sending a sharp, mortifying jolt up her arm. She knew the signs. She had catalogued them in other women for years. No, she thought. The word was very clear and very useless. Not this. Not now. Not ever. Outside, through the shutters, the noise of arriving alphas drifted in. Laughter, commands, the clank of armor, the particular energy of powerful men who knew they were being watched. 50 cents riding on the night wind, layered and complex, and none of them mattering, except one. It cut through the rest like a key turning. Dark cedar, cold iron, something older underneath both. And her body turned toward it before her mind could intervene, the way a compass needle swings north without being asked. She knew whose scent that was. She had seen him ride through the square that morning, had written 3 words in her record book about it. Richmond, present, unremarkable. She had almost believed herself. Alpha King Marmon Richmond. Another wave hit, and this one had teeth, and Serah bit down on a sound that would have woken the whole street. She moved through her cottage in 12 urgent seconds. Darkest cloak, unlaced boots, back door, shadows. Go, and slipped into the night before she could talk herself out of it. She was not running toward anything. She was absolutely, definitively running away. The birch grove by the creek was 20 minutes outside Dunvale at a normal pace. She made it in 14. She did not know that somewhere on the ridge road, a king had stopped walking mid-sentence, lifted his head, and breathed in. No, she did not know that he had excused himself from his retinue with 3 quiet words and begun moving toward the tree line. She did not know any of that yet. All she knew was the cold water on her face, the icy creek under her palms, the way the shock of it helped for exactly 4 seconds before another cramp seized her, and she pressed her forehead to the moss and tried to remember how to breathe. She had spent her whole life making sure no one ever looked at her twice, and somewhere in the birch grove, a king was already following her scent, and he was not running away. Dunvale woke slowly on summit mornings. The town had a rhythm to it on ordinary days. Bakers before dawn, the archive opening at first light, the market filling by mid-morning with the particular unhurried energy of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Serah loved that rhythm. She had spent 6 years learning every note of it, every pause, every variation. She knew which cobblestones rang hollow underfoot on cold mornings. She knew which corner of the square caught the first light, and which stayed in shadow until noon. She arrived at the archive before anyone else, the way she always did. The building smelled of old paper and dried ink, and the faint cedar and dust combination that Serah associated with safety, the way other women associated it with home fires or bread. She had her own key. She let herself in, lit her lamp, and settled at her desk in the corner that had been hers for 6 years. The summit delegation records needed to be updated before the first arrivals crossed the bridge. She opened her ledger, picked up her pen, began. The elders called her hollow, but she had long ago learned that hollow was simply the word frightened people used for full in ways they couldn't understand. She was not empty. She was precise, careful. She had built her life the way she built her records. Methodically, no, without waste, with attention to the things that actually mattered. What mattered? Her contract, her cottage, her name on her own lease. What did not matter? That her neighbor Lydia Bonner had looked at her with a specific kind of pity last spring when her own heat had passed, and Serah had brought soup and asked no questions. That Elder Rufus Doolin had told the council, loudly enough for Serah to hear from the next room, though that the scribe position should perhaps go to someone whose omega status was less ambiguous. That sometimes, in the long quiet of winter evenings, she caught herself watching the way bonded couples moved through the market, the small automatic adjustments they made for each other, the way 2 people could share a silence and have it mean something, and felt a sensation she refused to name. She was not lonely. She was precise. By the time the archive door opened at 7th hour, she had completed 4 delegation pages and begun a 5th. Her colleague, young Emmett Cross, arrived breathless and wide-eyed with the particular excitement of someone who had never seen a summit before. "They're already on the ridge road," he said, dropping his bag and immediately going to the window. "All of them. Even Richmond." Serah did not look up from her ledger. Richmond always arrives last. Record it when he crosses the bridge, not before. "Have you ever seen him?" "Up close?" "I've seen his delegation manifest. 12 riders, 2 advisors, 1 senior lord, standard summit attendance." Emmett turned from the window with the expression of someone who had been denied something unreasonable. "You're impossible." "I'm efficient," Serah said. "There's a difference." She did look up when the square filled, not because she wanted to, simply because the noise made concentration difficult, and the window was there, and looking was easier than pretending she wasn't. The arriving lords came in waves, Harlan Voss first, with his red banner and his 17 riders, and his way of taking up twice the necessary space. Then Lord Clyde Turlough, older, quieter, the kind of man whose influence moved through back rooms and signed documents rather than public display. Then a cluster of border lords whose names Serah recorded without looking up, working from the sigil designs on their banners. Then the square went different. She couldn't have explained the difference precisely. The noise didn't stop. If anything, it increased. Men calling out, horses shifting, the particular heightened energy of a crowd responding to something significant. But underneath the noise, a quiet settled. The way a room quiets when the person everyone has been waiting for finally walks through the door. Marmon Richmond rode through the south gate without ceremony. No herald, no banner-bearer in front. Just a man on a dark horse. A black coat, dark hair tied back simply, jaw set in the particular expression of someone who had been in rooms full of people performing for him for so long that performance had become invisible to him. Serah watched him cross the square. He did not look toward the archive window. There was no reason he would. He was looking at the road ahead, at the delegation point, where Elder Rufus Doolin was waiting to receive him, with the practiced warmth of a man who made himself useful to powerful guests. She watched Rufus step forward, watched the handshake, Rufus's two-handed grip, the kind that implied intimacy he had not earned, watched Marmon's single-handed return, polite and precisely calibrated. She wrote in her ledger, "Richmond, present, unremarkable." Then she went back to her delegation manifest and did not think about the way he had looked crossing the square, like a man who was watching everything while appearing to watch nothing. She was very good at not thinking about things. The day passed in the organized rush of summit preparation. Serah updated 14 records, cross-referenced 3 land dispute files at Lord Voss's request, and declined twice to attend the welcome gathering at the Great Hall, because archive work did not stop for welcome gatherings. Lydia Bonner found her at dusk, appearing in the archive doorway, with a wrapped bundle of food and the expression she wore when she had decided to be concerned. "You haven't eaten," Lydia said, setting the bundle on Serah's desk with the authority of someone who had done this many times. "I had tea." "Tea is not eating." Lydia settled into Emmett's chair. He had long since left, and folded her hands in her lap. "Did you see him? Richmond?" "I recorded his arrival." "That is not what I asked." Serah unwrapped the food bundle, bread, hard cheese, 2 apples. She ate in silence for a moment, not aware of Lydia watching her with the specific patience of a woman who had decided to wait her out. "He seems competent," Serah said finally. Lydia made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Every woman in the square lost the ability to form complete sentences, and your assessment is competent. "I'm a scribe. Competence is a compliment." Lydia shook her head, fond and exasperated in equal measure, and they sat together in comfortable quiet while the town settled into its summit night energy outside the window. Serah walked home at 9th hour. The streets were still busy. Summit nights always ran late, Alpha lords and their retinues filling the taverns, the energy of the town elevated and slightly unsteady, the way it always was when powerful strangers arrived in a place small enough to feel their presence everywhere. She noticed nothing unusual, while her cottage was exactly as she had left it. Fire banked low, desk clear, the particular order she maintained without thinking about it. She changed into her sleeping clothes, made chamomile tea, sat at her desk to review her notes for the morning. The warmth started at the 10th hour. Small, central. She pressed one hand to her sternum and frowned. The fire was low. She turned to check it, wondering if a draft had somehow overheated the room in one specific location. but the fire was perfectly ordinary. She turned back to her notes, kept working. The warmth grew. By the time it had spread from her sternum to her shoulders to the tips of her fingers, Serah had set her pen down and was sitting very still, with both hands flat on the desk, breathing carefully, doing the arithmetic that she had watched other women do, and always, privately, been grateful she would never have to do herself. It is not, she thought precisely, what I think it is. Then the first wave hit, and Serah Finch, who had spent 26 years being free, understood in one complete and terrible moment exactly what she had been free from, and what it was going to cost her now that the freedom was over. She was moving before the second wave came. Cloak, boots, no time for laces, back door, shadows. She did not know where she was going until she was already going there. The birch grove by the creek, her mother's place, the only location in the world that was entirely hers. She ran, and behind her, in the summit encampment on the ridge, a dark-haired king lifted his head from a conversation about border tariffs, breathed in once, slowly, and went very still. The grove was smaller than memory made it. Serah always forgot that. The way places from childhood expanded in the mind, grew larger and more sheltered with distance, then revealed their actual proportions when you returned to them, breathless and desperate at midnight. The birch trees were still there, 7 of them in a rough circle, bark white as bone in the moonlight. The creek still cut through the center, cold and quick and utterly indifferent to the woman currently on her knees at its edge. She scooped icy water in both hands and pressed them to her face. The cold helped. For 4 seconds. Then the heat returned, deeper this time, and she gripped the creek bank and pressed her forehead to the moss and focused on the ground beneath her palms. Solid, real, cold, here, until the wave passed. You are fine, she told herself. You are going to be fine. You came to the grove. You are away from the village. No one will find you here. You just need to wait it out and... Footsteps. She heard them before she processed what they meant. Soft, deliberate, coming from the far side of the grove through the gap between 2 birch trees. Not rushed, not sneaking, just walking, with the particular steadiness of someone who had decided to be careful. Oh, Serah was on her feet before the sound completed itself in her mind. The man who stepped from between the birches was not what she had been bracing for. She had been bracing for Harlan Voss, aggressive and territorial, or one of the border lords, or someone who had tracked her scent and arrived with the particular ugly confidence of an alpha who believed that a blooming omega in the woods at midnight was a question with only one answer. Marmon Richmond stopped at the tree line. He did not move closer. He stood at the edge of the grove with 10 feet of moonlit grass between them and simply looked at her, not with hunger, not with triumph, not with the particular calculation she had been expecting. Something quieter than all of those things, something that took her a moment to identify because she saw it so rarely. He looked careful. I followed the scent, he said. His voice was lower than it had seemed from across the square. More worn. But I stopped at the tree line because I chose to, not because anything made me. Serah's instincts were screaming in 3 different directions simultaneously. The heat in her body was pulling her toward him with a force that was genuinely frightening. Her pride was drawing every available defense. Her mind was running calculations. Distance to the tree line, how fast she could move, whether screaming would bring anyone useful or just anyone. You should leave, she said. Oh, I know. Then leave. He didn't. He stayed at the tree line with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on her face, not on her neck, not on the pulse she could feel hammering at her throat. On her face, with an attention that was different from being watched. "I will," he said. "If you say the word, I'll go back to the encampment and you won't see me again. I mean that." She stared at him. She had spent 6 years reading documents for a living, or she had learned to tell the difference between language that meant what it said and language that was shaped to sound like it did. He meant it. She could not have explained precisely how she knew, but she knew the way she knew when a record had been altered. Something in the weight of it, the absence of performance. Another wave hit her before she could decide what to do with that information. This one was sharper than the ones before, deep and insistent, and her knees went wrong, and she was going down before her mind registered the problem. His hand caught her elbow, not gripping, not holding on, just steadying, the way you might catch a door that was about to close on something important. "Easy," he said quietly. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm that had nothing to do with the heat, and everything to do with the heat simultaneously, and Serah pulled away on instinct, and then felt the loss of the contact so acutely that she hated her own body for 3 complete seconds. "Don't," she said. He released her immediately, stepped back, gave her the space. "All right?" She straightened, pulled her cloak tighter, assembled her dignity from the scattered pieces of it, and looked him directly in the eye. "I know what you know about me right now," she said. "I know what it looks like. And I am telling you, whatever you think this means, whatever you think you have the right to assume—" "I don't assume anything," he said. "That's actually what I came to tell you." She waited. He moved carefully, the way you move around something that might bolt, and settled on a tree root 6 feet away, dropping to sitting with the ease of a man who had long ago stopped caring about the dignity of his clothes. He looked up at her from there, and the difference in height between them, her standing, him sitting, shifted something in the dynamic that she noticed and filed away. "There are ways to help," he said, without taking anything. "I've studied them. Pressure points, scent sharing, methods that ease the edge without completing a bond. I know that's not what Alpha Lords are known for studying. I had reasons for learning it." She looked at him for a long moment. That why would a king study how to help an Omega without claiming her? He was quiet. The creek moved between them, cold and quick. A wind moved through the birches. "Because I remember what it felt like," he said finally, "to have someone try to reduce me to what my biology could be made to do. And I decided I wouldn't be that for anyone else." The honesty in his voice was the most disarming thing she had encountered in 26 years of carefully managed encounters. Another cramp hit, this one bad enough that she pressed one hand to her side and breathed through her teeth. When she looked up, he was watching her with an expression that was not pity. Pity she could have dismissed, but something closer to recognition. She sat down on the moss across the creek from him. Not close, not agreeing to anything. Just sitting, because standing was becoming a project. "Explain the scent sharing," she said. He explained it without embellishment. A way for her body to register a response without the response being complete. Proximity, contact, his scent settling against her skin in a way that told the heat it had been answered without sealing anything between them. Temporary, reversible. Nothing that could be used against her in the morning. She listened. She asked 2 questions. He answered them directly. "All right," she said. He moved across the creek and sat beside her, close enough for warmth, and not close enough for pressure, and she let herself lean, fractionally, into the cedar and iron steadiness of him. His arm came around her shoulders, slowly enough that she could have stopped it at any point. She didn't stop it. The heat ebbed, not gone, but quieter, manageable. She breathed for what felt like the first time in an hour, and closed her eyes. They sat like that, while the night moved around them, and the creek kept talking to itself. "You watched the arrival from the archive window," he said eventually, quiet enough that it was almost not a question. "I record all arrivals. You wrote unremarkable in your ledger." She opened her eyes. "You could not possibly know that." "I couldn't." And she heard, under the words, the faintest trace of something that was not quite a smile. "But you relaxed just now, which tells me something." She thought about being annoyed by that, as decided it would require more energy than she had available. "You were watching the archive window," she said. "I was watching a candle," he said. "Still burning at midnight when every other light in the town had gone out. I noticed it 3 nights in a row before tonight." She had no answer for that, so she let the silence be what it was, and felt the heat continue its slow, grateful recession, and watched the moon cross the gap between 2 birch trees overhead. When the sky began to change at the edges, he helped her up with careful hands. He found her cloak where it had slipped, and settled it back over her shoulders. His fingers rested there for a moment, just a moment, before dropping. "Stay out of the main square tomorrow," he said. "The summit alphas will be restless after a first night. Your scent will carry. I have archive work. Do it from home if you can." She turned to look at him. A daybreak was coming in grey and quiet between the birch trees, and in the thin early light he looked like a man who carried a great deal and had become accustomed to the weight of it. "No one can know about tonight," he said. Low and serious, the words carrying the weight of a vow rather than a warning. She studied his face, found nothing in it that was performing. "No one can know," she agreed. He nodded once, then walked back into the trees, and the grove was quiet, and the creek moved over its stones, and Serah stood alone in the coming morning with her hand pressed to her sternum, where something warm still glowed. She had come here to hide. She was leaving with something she had no name for yet, and no idea how dangerous it was about to become. She made it home before the bread sellers opened. The cottage was exactly as she had left it. Fire cold now, ink dried on the overturned well, 17 pages of ruined border treaty spread across the desk. She stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the mess, and felt, for reasons she couldn't have explained, that it was appropriate. Things had spilled. The cleanup would take time. She lit a fresh candle, made tea, sat at her desk, and thought very carefully about nothing. Lydia arrived at 7:30 hour, which was earlier than usual, and which meant she had been watching the road. "You were gone all night," Lydia said, stepping inside without being invited, because that was the nature of their particular friendship. "I went to the grove." "The whole night?" Serah wrapped both hands around her tea. "The archive work is behind. I should get started." Lydia sat down in the chair across the desk and folded her hands in her lap, with the patience of a woman who had learned that Serah would talk eventually, if given sufficient quiet and enough time. The quiet stretched. "Something happened," Serah said finally. "I know. How?" "Because you've been holding your tea for 4 minutes without drinking it. You only do that when you're thinking about something you've decided not to think about." Serah looked down at her cup, took a deliberate sip. "My heat came." Lydia went very still. "Last night, during the first summit arrivals." Serah set the cup down precisely. "I went to the grove before anyone could. Was anyone there?" A pause. Not long, but Lydia caught it. "Serah." "It was handled," Serah said. "Carefully. Nothing I didn't agree to. Nothing that changes anything." Lydia looked at her for a long moment, with an expression that held a great deal, and said very little of it. Then she nodded, once, and asked no further questions. That was also the nature of their particular friendship. The heat had ebbed to a dull, manageable warmth by morning. Serah worked from home as she had been told, a small concession she made without acknowledging she was making it, and spent the day transcribing records and trying not to notice the way her attention kept drifting toward the ridge. The thread was new. That was the only word she had for it. A thread, something thin and warm running from the center of her chest in a direction she didn't look at directly. When it was quiet, it was almost ignorable. When it pulsed, which it did, periodically, yet with no warning, it felt like someone in a distant room had turned on a light. She told herself this was a known side effect of proximity during a bloom. Temporary, physiological, nothing personal. By evening, she had almost convinced herself. He came back to the grove at moonrise. She was already there. Neither of them mentioned that. This night was different from the first. Quieter, easier, with the frantic edge of her heat settled enough that she could sit upright and hold a conversation without it costing her something. They sat on opposite sides of the creek at first, then on the same side, then with her back against a birch tree, and his shoulder 2 inches from hers, and the distance collapsed in increments that they both pretended not to track. He asked about her work. She told him, briefly, about the archive, the treaty records, the land dispute files, the particular satisfaction of information becoming organized. He listened with real attention, the kind that asks questions because it wants to know rather than because it knows it should. "What do you want?" he asked. Past Dunvale, past the archive. She looked at the creek. "People don't usually ask me that." "I'm asking." She thought about it honestly. "I want my work to matter. Not because someone let me do it, because I was the best person to do it, and someone recognized that without being surprised by it." She paused. "That probably sounds small." "It sounds exactly right," he said. "The things that actually matter usually sound small when you say them out loud." She looked at him sideways. "What do you want?" "Past the summit. Past the crown." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. But then, one morning, when no one needs anything from me before I've had time to decide who I am when no one's watching. She understood that more completely than she expected to. "The scar," she said. It had been at the edge of her awareness since the first night, a faint silver line visible at his collar when his coat sat a certain way. "You don't have to tell me." "I know." He reached up and pulled his collar aside, without drama or performance, showing her the full line of it. Curved, silvered, unmistakably, a bond scar that had been broken before completion. 7 years ago, a peace negotiation that was something else entirely. A family with ambitions, and a daughter who was willing, and a substance in my wine that was supposed to make me willing too. Serah's chest tightened, not with pity, with a specific and precise anger on behalf of the man sitting beside her. "It didn't complete," he continued. His voice was flat, the way voices go flat when they've gone over a thing enough times to stop feeling the edges of it. "My second had an antidote, but the attempt—" He stopped. "It leaves more than a physical mark." "I know," she said quietly. "A different kind, but I know." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw him add something to whatever understanding he had been building of her since the first night. She reached out, slowly, deliberately, giving him every opportunity to recognize the choice she was making, and covered his hand with hers. His hand turned over beneath hers and held on. They stayed like that for a while, and the creek moved, and the birch trees stood their quiet watch, and neither of them said anything that would have required the moment to become something more defined than it was. The third day arrived with a change in the air. Serah noticed it, the way she noticed everything, not dramatically, but precisely. Their looks in the market that lasted a beat too long, a conversation that stopped when she approached rather than simply including her. Elder Rufus Doolin, watching her from across the square with an expression she had seen on him before, when he was managing something. She went to the elder's house that afternoon on the pretext of archive business. She found him in conversation. The man across Rufus's table was well dressed and quiet in the particular way of people who are paid to be unobtrusive. He went very still when Serah entered. Rufus's smile was half a second slower than it should have been. "Serah," Rufus said, "I wasn't expecting you. The Summit Land records need your seal," she said, holding up the relevant documents. She kept her eyes on Rufus and didn't look at the other man, which meant she was watching the other man with her peripheral attention entirely. She saw the edge of a sigil on his lapel pin, dark, stylized, not a house she recognized immediately. As she left after 2 minutes, seal obtained, nothing outwardly remarkable. She was halfway home when Lydia fell into step beside her. "I was waiting at your cottage," Lydia said quietly. "I need to tell you something." They went inside. Lydia sat down. Her hands were not entirely steady. "3 nights ago," Lydia said, "before your heat, I was walking past Rufus Doolin's house. Late, I had been to see my mother, and I heard him talking. The window was open." She paused. "He was talking about you, about your bloodline. He used a word I had to look up afterward." Serah sat very still. "What word?" "Still water." The word landed in the room and changed the temperature of it. Serah had heard that word once before. Her mother had said it, quietly, at the end of a long night when Serah was 17, and had asked, for the last time, why she was different. Her mother had said, "Some gifts are quieter than others, and some blood runs deeper than it looks. And the word for what you carry is still water, and you will know what it means when the time comes." Her mother had died the following spring. There had been no one left to ask. "There was a sum mentioned," Lydia said, "a significant one, and a name." "Haskins," Serah said. Lydia looked at her. "How did you know?" "The sigil on his visitor's lapel. Lord Dermyn Haskins. I recognized it once I was away from the room." Serah's hands were folded in her lap. She was making herself keep them still. "He collects rare-blooded Omegas, uses their bloodlines as political leverage." "Rufus sold your information to him?" "Yes." The word came out precise and quiet. She sat with it for a moment, the specific weight of it, the particular shape of the betrayal. Rufus Doolin had been the closest thing Dun Vale had to a guardian for her after her mother died. He had recommended her for the archive position. He had told her, in words she had believed, that he thought her worth more than the village's opinion of her. He had been keeping records of his own this whole time, waiting for the right buyer. Something in her chest that had still been soft, in the particular place shaped by that early kindness, quietly closed. "What are you going to do?" Lydia asked. Serah looked at the candle on her desk, at the ink stain that was still there, where the well had spilled 3 nights ago when everything changed. I'm going to go to the Grove," she said, "and I'm going to tell him." Lydia studied her face. "Him?" "Yes." Another pause. "Serah, how careful are you being?" Serah thought about careful hands at her elbow. A man who sat down so she wouldn't have to look up at him. 10 feet of distance, maintained until she moved first. "Careful enough," she said, "and less carefully than I'd planned." Lydia let out a slow breath, then reached across the desk and squeezed Serah's ink-stained hand once. "Hard. Don't be careful," she said. "And tell me everything eventually." Lord Dermyn Haskins found her at the market the next morning. She knew who he was before he introduced himself. She had spent the previous night reading everything the archive held on him, which was more than most people would have thought to preserve, and less than she needed. What the documents showed: 3 summits attended, no formal complaints, but 4 Omega women from outlying villages who had entered his custody under various official explanations, and whose subsequent records were notably sparse. What the documents implied was a great deal more. He came to her stall while she was selecting herbs for Lydia: chamomile, dried lavender, the particular blend that helped with sleep, and introduced himself with the smooth warmth of a man who had practiced being unthreatening until it became his most effective weapon. "Serah Finch," he said. "The archive scribe. I've been hoping to meet you. I need documentation work for the summit records. Specialized classification, the kind that requires real precision." She looked at him. His eyes were the particular kind of pleasant that has nothing behind it. "The archive handles all summit documentation," she said. "You would submit a request through Elder Doolin. I prefer direct arrangements." A pause, calibrated and light. "Your bloodline is remarkable, you know. The Stillwater women in the old records. Extraordinary ability for document authentication. A gift that works on ink itself, if I'm understanding the accounts correctly." Her hands did not shake. She had spent 26 years learning to keep her hands steady. "I'm not familiar with that terminology," she said. He smiled. It did not touch his eyes. "Of course. Well, if you change your mind about the documentation work, I'm in the east wing of the encampment. My door is always open." He walked away. Serah stood at the herb stall and counted her own heartbeats until she trusted her legs again. Then she finished selecting the herbs, paid the vendor, and walked home with the specific calm of someone who has identified the danger and decided not to give it the satisfaction of a reaction. That night in the grove, she told Marmon everything. She watched his face while she spoke, or the pleasant expression he wore for public consumption had been absent from the grove since the first night. Out here, he was simply himself, or the closest version of it she had access to, and what his face did while she described the market conversation was not anything she could have called pleasant. Something cold moved through his expression. Controlled, deliberate, the way cold moves through deep water, invisible on the surface, everything underneath. "Well, he's been working a pattern for 3 summits," Marmon said when she finished, "identifying rare-blooded women in the border territories, using their bloodlines as leverage in council negotiations. I've been building documentation against him for 8 months. And you didn't know about me?" "No." The word was flat and carried something underneath it. Not guilt, precisely, but something adjacent. "He did, which means Rufus Doolin has been reporting to him for longer than 3 days." She nodded. She had already done that arithmetic. "What does he want?" she asked, not because she didn't know, because she wanted to hear him say it plainly. "Custody," Marmon said. "Official, politically covered, completely controlled custody. He'll frame it as protection. He'll find a way to make it look formal." His jaw tightened. "He's preparing documentation. Old scrolls, altered. No, claiming the Stillwater bloodline is destabilizing, that women who carry it have historically used it to manipulate Alpha authority. He'll present it to the full council as evidence that you're a threat to summit order." She let that sit for a moment. How do you know what he's preparing? A young woman named Mabel Cross has been passing information to my second advisor for 2 weeks. She works in Dermin's tent. She's been frightened of what she's been overhearing. You were already watching him. Yes. But you didn't know he had found me. No. A pause. I'm sorry for that. She looked at him. The apology was not for failing to protect her. They both understood she did not need that framing. It was for something more specific, for the fact that the danger had been circling her before he knew to look, and that knowledge sat in him with visible discomfort. What are the options? She said. Or we could move first. I could present my documentation against him to the council before he moves. He met her eyes. Or you could. What does that mean? The Stillwater gift authenticates documents, works on the ink itself. That's what the old accounts say. Forgeries don't hold under it. He paused. If you can do that, if you walked into that council tent and held his scrolls and they came apart in your hands, there's nothing he could say that the council would believe after. She looked at the creek for a long moment. I don't know if I can do it, she said. I don't know how to use it. I've never... She stopped. The gift has never been something I controlled. It just happened. The ink in his scrolls. You may not need to control it, he said quietly. Well, you may just need to hold them and let it respond to the lie. She thought about what her mother had said. You will know what it means when the time comes. And if it doesn't work? Then I have documentation of my own, and I will use it, and this ends a different way. His hand found hers in the dark. But I think it will work. I think you have always been more than you were allowed to know. She looked at their joined hands, at the moonlight on the creek. You would go against a council lord for a scribe from a border village, she said. I would go against the council for you, he said. Those aren't the same thing. She had no answer for that. She leaned her head against his shoulder instead, just slightly, just for a moment, and felt the warmth of him settle around her like something she had been cold without for a very long time. Tomorrow, she said. We should be ready for him to move tomorrow. I know. And you should go back before your absence is noted. I know. But he didn't move. Not immediately. His thumb traced a slow, absent line across the back of her hand, and the creek talked to itself, and the birch trees stood their watch. When he finally stood and pulled her up with him, careful as always, he did not let go of her hand right away. Serah. She waited. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the council says, whatever Dermin presents, you are not a threat to anything that deserves protecting. His voice was even and certain. You are the kind of person who stays up all night, making sure other people's records are right. The world needs more of that, not less. She stood in the grove after he had gone and pressed one hand to her sternum and felt the thread between them glow warm and steady. I know, she said, to no one. She almost believed it. Morning came grey and heavy, but with the particular flatness of a sky that has decided something. Serah felt Dermin's men in the square before she saw them, a change in the texture of the day, conversation shortening, people moving with the slight over-deliberateness of those who have noticed something and are deciding whether to react. She walked through the market with her usual purpose, archive bag over one shoulder, and catalogued them in her peripheral vision without appearing to look. 3 men, well-dressed, now stationed at the 3 natural entry points to the square, not aggressive, never aggressive with Dermin's people, not openly. That was the whole architecture of how he operated. Just present, watching. She bought bread from Glenda Mills at the bakery stall. Glenda wrapped it in paper with hands that were moving slightly too fast. "You should go home," Glenda said quietly, eyes on the paper and not on Serah. "I have archive work." "Serah," Glenda's voice dropped further. "Och, they've been asking questions about your family, about your mother's people." She took the bread. "Thank you, Glenda." She walked toward the well. The lead guard found her there. A large, precise man, she would later learn, was called Emmett Voss, one of Dermin's senior staff. He had the bearing of someone who had learned to make official things sound inevitable. "Serah Finch," he said, appearing at her elbow with the timing of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. "That Lord Dermin Haskins requests your presence at the summit encampment. Documentation purposes. The request has been authorized by Elder Doolin." She set down the water pail with great care. The square was not empty. It was market morning. A dozen people within earshot, twice that within sight. She was aware of every one of them. The butcher's apprentice who had stopped mid-task, Lydia's sister, Leona Bonner, frozen at the vegetable stall with a bunch of carrots halfway into her basket. She turned and looked at Emmett Voss with the full, level attention she used when she was reading a document she already knew had been altered. "My documentation work," she said, clearly and without heat, "is contracted to the Dunvale Council, not to Lord Dermin, and not to Elder Doolin acting outside his council authority. If Lord Dermin requires archive services, the appropriate request process is documented. I would be happy to direct him to the relevant forms." Emmett Voss had not expected that sentence. She could see him recalibrating. "Lord Haskins has been answered," she said. "Thank you." She picked up her water pail. Behind her, she heard the particular quality of silence that a crowd makes when it has collectively decided to witness something. Then a different sound. The measured or deliberate footsteps of a man who has crossed worse ground than a market square and treated all of it the same way. She did not turn around. She felt him the way she had felt him since the grove. The thread pulling toward the warmth of him, the cedar and iron scent that her body had memorized without asking permission. Marmon Richmond walked into the square with two of his personal guard and the absolute absence of hurry. He did not look at Emmett Voss first. He looked at her. A quick, unchecking look, a question and an answer at once, confirming she was unharmed before he did anything else. She gave him the smallest nod, and something in his shoulders settled by a fraction that only she would have noticed. Then he turned to Emmett Voss. "She answered you," he said, simple and complete as a door closing. "I suggest you hear her." The three guards, to their credit, made a reasonable decision. They withdrew to the edge of the square, then out of the square, but then presumably back to wherever Dermin was waiting for a report. The square breathed. Someone, she suspected Glenda Mills based on the direction, made a sound that had elements of a laugh in it. Conversations resumed in the careful, elevated way of people processing something they would be discussing for weeks. Serah and Marmon walked back across the square together. Not touching, not speaking. The space between them approximately 18 inches and full of everything that could not be said in public view. She was aware of the looks following them. Not unfriendly, most of them, but intent, the specific attention of a community recalibrating what it knows. Lydia was in the bakery doorway. Her hands were over her mouth. Her eyes were very bright. Serah looked straight ahead and kept walking. But she felt the warmth moving through her that had nothing to do with her heat. Something simpler and stranger. Something that might have been the particular feeling of having been chosen in front of witnesses. They stopped at the corner of the archive lane, out of the square's direct sight line. "He'll move today," Marmon said quietly. "After that, he won't wait." "I know." Are you ready? She thought about the council tent. 8 lords in a curved line. A Dermin and his scrolls and his reasonable voice, her hands holding forged parchment, and whatever her mother had left inside her that had no name until 3 days ago. I don't know, she said honestly. But I'm going. Something moved through his expression. Not approval. Something quieter and more personal than approval. I'll be there, he said. I know. She looked at him for a moment in the thin market morning light. Don't step in unless I need it. A pause. Or Serah, I need to do this part myself. If you do it for me, they'll say I needed saving. If I do it, they'll have to decide what to do with a woman who didn't. She held his gaze. Let me stand up first. I'll let you know if I need backup. He looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. She had not expected him to agree that easily. The agreement did something to her that the fighting would not have done. It landed in a soft place and stayed there. She turned toward the archive lane. Serah. She stopped. You have been standing up, he said quietly, behind her, the whole time. Today is just the first time everyone else is going to see it. She walked away before he could see what that did to her face. The Summit Council tent was enormous and poorly lit and smelled of incense and old authority. Serah walked in without stopping at the entrance. She had learned, 6 years ago, that hesitation at doorways was the first thing powerful men use to calibrate how much resistance they expected from you. She gave them nothing to calibrate. Marmon was a step behind her. She felt him stop when she did not. She was already through the door. 8 lords arranged in a curved line, as she had expected. Faces that had spent decades learning to reveal nothing. Lord Bess Turlough at the centre, the eldest, silver-haired, what with the measured patience of someone who had seen more than he was willing to discuss. Lord Clyde on the left end, watchful. 6 others whose names she had memorized from the delegation, manifests. Dermin Haskins stood at the centre of the room. He smiled when she entered, not with his eyes, which she had learned to watch for, and gestured to the space across from him, as though she had been invited to something pleasant. Thank you for coming, Miss Finch, he said. She said nothing, though she stood in the centre of the tent and looked at the council with the same attention she gave documents she was about to have to reconstruct. Lord Turlough spoke first. Lord Haskins has presented materials relevant to the summit record. We have agreed to hear them before taking any formal position. You have been called as the subject of the record. Understood, she said. Dermin unrolled his scrolls. He was good at this. She had known he would be. A man who had done it before, and won. His presentation was smooth, documented, devastating in its surface reasonableness. The Stillwater bloodline explained with apparent scholarly care. The historical record of Stillwater gifted women and the documented instances of alpha authority being undermined through bond manipulation. The specific danger of an ungifted bloom, a late heat, he emphasized, very late, highly unusual, coinciding with the summit arrival of a reigning king. But the implication was velvet-covered and razor-edged. She had done this deliberately. Her heat was a manipulation. Her connection to Marmon was the proof. She listened to the whole presentation without moving. When he finished, she said, "May I see the documents?" A small request. Reasonable. She was the archive scribe. It was entirely plausible that she might wish to examine the records being used to describe her. Dermin hesitated for exactly 1 second. 1 second, too long. Lord Turlough nodded. Out of course. The scroll was placed in her hands. It was old parchment, or convincingly aged. She could feel the texture of it, the particular slightly wrong weight of something that had been treated to seem older than it was. She unrolled it slowly, read the first line. Then something shifted. She had felt it only once before, in the grove, briefly, the night her heat had first broken. Something deep and instinctive moving under her awareness, like a current below still water. Her mother's voice, distantly. You will know what it means when the time comes. It was happening now. The warmth moved from her chest to her hands. Not heat, not her bloom. Something older and quieter and more certain than either. The ink on the parchment shimmered. Not visibly. Not yet. She could feel it before she could see it, the way you feel weather before it arrives. She pressed her palm flat to the scroll. The letters moved. What they shifted and dissolved and reformed under her hands, while the tent went very, very quiet around her. The false accusations came apart like mist burning off water. Beneath them, in ink that had been hidden under the forgery, the original text appeared. An old record, crowned with a royal seal that made Lord Turlough lean sharply forward. Serah read it aloud. Her voice was completely steady. The document was a royal decree, 3 generations old, placing all women of Stillwater blood under permanent crown protection. Signed, sealed, archived in the original royal record, a record that Dermyn had known about and had buried beneath his forgery because it made everything he was attempting not just wrong but actively illegal. The tent was silent. She set the scroll on the table between her and Dermyn and stepped back. Dermyn's composure cracked at the edges. Just at the edges. He looked at the document. At her. At the council. The calculation in his eyes was moving very fast. This is the original text, Lord Turlough said, voice flat and careful, which authenticates the royal seal. Lord Haskins, how do you account for this discrepancy? Dermyn moved. Not toward her, toward the table, reaching for the inside of his coat, producing something small, dark, a sealed vial. Marmon crossed the tent in 3 steps. His hand closed around Dermyn's wrist before the vial reached anywhere useful. No drama. No announcement. He simply closed the distance and stopped the action, the way you stop a door from closing on something important. Don't, he said. 1 word. Quiet as a closing room. Dermyn looked at the council, at Serah, at the document sitting on the table with its crown seal, visible to every lord in the room. Then he went slack, not yielding, simply calculating that the calculation was over. You've won a battle, he said. My allies will be named in the documentation that woman just authenticated, Marmon said. Sit down. Lord Turlough called the vote. It did not take long. Charges dismissed. Bloodline recognized and protected under crown law. The decree she had uncovered was legally binding, which meant Dermyn had not only forged documents, but had actively attempted to circumvent existing royal protections. That was a separate and significantly more serious matter. But Dermyn was escorted from the tent by summit guards. Serah stood in the center of the council room and didn't shake until she was facing the exit and could be reasonably certain no one was watching her directly. Outside the tent, the air was cold and clean, and she breathed it in deeply enough that the edges of her vision steadied. Marmon came out a moment after her. He stood beside her without touching her, looking at the same mid-distance she was looking at. You didn't need me, he said. I knew I didn't, she said. I needed to know that you knew it too. A pause. I knew it. She believed him. The walk back to his horse was quiet and ordinary, and the thread between them was warm and steady, and she thought, not for the first time, that ordinary was deeply underrated. She had walked into the tent, carrying the weight of a lie someone else had built around her name. She walked out carrying only her own. Off the ridge road was dark and cold, and she was in front of him on his horse, with his arms around her, and the bond thread between them was the warmest thing in the night. They had not spoken much since the council tent. There had been the formalities, the official record, the documentation that would follow Dermin back to whatever accountability waited for him in the capital. There had been a brief, vivid moment where Mabel Cross had been found and officially placed under summit protection, her information formally documented. There had been Rufus Doolin in his house, not meeting Sarah's eyes. She had gone to see him before they left Dunvale. She had not needed to say much. He already knew. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has been caught at something he had convinced himself didn't count, and she looked back at him with the particular expression of someone who has revised a long-held belief and found the revision painful but necessary. "I wanted to note it," she had said quietly, "in whatever record exists of my employment under this council, that I produced accurate work, that nothing in my record reflects this." "Of course," he had said. She had nodded once and left. She hadn't looked back. On the horse now, in the dark, she let herself lean against Marmon's chest and feel the steadiness of him, the particular warmth of someone who had decided to hold on without being asked to. "What happens now?" she said. "To Dermin. The council will refer the matter to the capital. The protected bloodline violation alone is grounds for removal from his title." A pause. "To us, there will be noise. The court, the other lords. A king claiming a fated mate from a border village during the summit is not a quiet event. Will you be ready for that?" He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "I've been ready for it for longer than I've admitted to myself." His arms tightened slightly around her. "Or the question is whether you will be." She thought about that. About the archive. About her lease and her contract, and the particular life she had built in the careful margins of things. About the woman who had run to the grove 3 nights ago, terrified of what it meant to be wanted, and whether that woman was still who she was. She was still that woman. And she was also something more now. Something that had been there the whole time, waiting under the stillness for exactly this. "I'll need my things," she said. "And I need to say goodbye to Lydia properly. Not the doorway version. Of course. And the archive records need to be transferred to Emmett Cross with appropriate documentation. I won't leave them mid-process. Obviously. And..." She stopped. And I think," she said slowly, "that I have been very careful for a very long time, and I think I might be ready to be something other than careful." His answer was to press his lips to her temple, quiet and deliberate and completely without performance. Lydia was at the cottage when they returned to Dunvale. She had, absolutely not, packed a bag that was sitting beside the door with the studied casualness of something placed there entirely by coincidence. Her eyes took in Serah and Marmon together in one comprehensive look, and then filled up in a way she was clearly refusing to allow. "You're going," Lydia said. "Yes, to the castle. Eventually." Lydia opened her arms. No, Sarah walked into them and held on, and Lydia held back with the specific, fierce grip of someone who has been friends with a woman through all her quiet seasons, and is now watching her step into something louder, and wants it desperately for her. "You were never hollow," Lydia said into her shoulder. "You were just waiting for someone worth blooming for." Sarah laughed. The sound was wet and completely unguarded, and she did not try to make it otherwise. "Come visit," Sarah said. or when it's less complicated. Come and see what the archives look like when they're properly resourced. I'm going to embarrass you in front of lords, Lydia said. I'm counting on it. She stepped back, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand in one efficient motion, met Lydia's eyes and found everything she needed there. Then she turned. Marmon was waiting at the gate of the cottage, not impatiently, simply there, his horse at his side. He had given them the goodbye without being asked to. Or she added that to the accounting she had been keeping, the quiet running tally of who this man was when no one was performing. "Ready?" she said. He offered her his hand. She took it. They went back to the grove. She had not planned it, or rather, she had not decided it consciously. But when his horse turned toward the birch trees in the early dark, she made no objection. Some things should end where they began. Some circles should be closed properly. But the grove was the same as always. White birch bark in the moonlight, the creek talking over its stones, the particular quality of quiet that felt like it had been saved for her by the trees themselves. She stood in the center of it and felt the place settle around her. Marmon stood across from her, not at the tree line this time, beside her. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Properly. Ask." He looked at her for a moment. Really looked. The way he had been looking at her since the first night, like someone reading something they want to understand completely and not just know. "Serah Finch, will you have me? All of me. The scars and the crown and the court and the mornings where I haven't figured out yet who I am when no one's watching. Will you have all of that?" She held his gaze. She thought about her mother, who had left her one inheritance and no explanation. She thought about the archive and the lease with her name on it, and the life she had built that was hers and nobody else's. She thought about what it meant to choose, not to be chosen, not to have biology or fate or longing choose for you, but to look at a person in clear light and say yes. That is what I want from a place of complete freedom. "I want you to know," she said, "that I am not choosing you because my heat told me to. My heat is done. This is me, Serah Finch, 26 years old, all ink stains on 3 fingers, archive contract, Mother's Grove, choosing you. Because you stopped at the tree line. Because you sat down so I wouldn't have to look up at you. Because you said I'll go if you say the word, and meant it. Because of every single thing you did not do when you could have done it." She stepped closer. "Yes," she said. "I'll have you, all of it." Something in his face did something that had nothing to do with a king, and everything to do with a man who had been carrying a 7-year scar and had stopped expecting anyone to look at it clearly. He cupped her face with both hands. His kiss was slow and deliberate and tasted of cold air and something warm underneath, careful the way only someone who understood the weight of not being careful could be careful. Her hands found the lapels of his coat and held on. When he pulled back just enough to look at her, she tilted her head, and he understood. His lips found the curve of her neck, gentle and unhurried, asking permission in the pressure of them even now. She closed her eyes. The bond settled between them like a door opening rather than closing, warm, certain, the thread that had been glowing in her chest since the first night, finally, fully, finding its other end. Not a snap, not a roar, something closer to recognition, or the feeling of arriving somewhere you understand, with a surprise you have been moving toward for a long time. She felt him completely, the weight of the crown he carried, the 7-year scar and everything it had cost him, the specific determination of a man who had decided that his power was only worth anything if he used it carefully. His warmth, his particular brand of dry attention. The way he had been watching a candle in an archive window for 3 nights before the night everything changed. He felt her, the precision, the quiet, the ink-stained fingers and the loaded archive shelves. The woman who had built a life in the margins and kept it meticulously. The thing that had been sleeping in her blood since before she was old enough to know it was there. Awake now, settled now, hers. They stayed in the grove until the moon crossed the gap between 2 birch trees. Then they sat against a tree trunk with her back against his chest and his arms around her, and the creek talking between its banks, and she thought about the girl who had run here in terror 3 nights ago, and felt, not for the first time, that the distance between who you are and who you are becoming is crossed in smaller steps than it looks from the beginning. When the sky began to change at the edges, Marmon said, very quietly, into her hair, "No one can know about tonight." The same words, or the same low, private weight. She felt the smile move through her before she could think about it. "Everyone can know about tonight," she said. "Everyone can know about every night after this." His arms tightened around her. She tipped her head back against his shoulder and let the morning come. Let it find her there in the grove, in the light, in the particular warmth of being completely and deliberately seen by exactly the right person. The archive records were transferred to Emmett Cross in good order. The cottage lease was properly closed, the documents filed, a letter written to the Dunvale Council outlining the status of every active project and the location of every relevant file. Serah Finch did not leave things unfinished. Lydia came to the castle the following spring. She absolutely did embarrass Serah in front of 2 lords, a senior advisor, and a visiting delegation from the Northern Territories. And Serah laughed harder than she had laughed in years, and made no attempt to stop any of it. The Stillwater Decree was officially restored to the Crown record. 2 other women were found in outlying villages whose bloodlines had been similarly suppressed. The process of recognizing them took time and care, and a great deal of careful documentation, which Serah handled herself. The court learned, gradually and then all at once, what it meant to have Serah Finch managing the Royal Archives. They learned that the records were accurate. They learned that documents submitted for the official record were reviewed with a precision that found errors and alterations with a reliability that made certain kinds of maneuvering no longer worth attempting. They learned that the woman the king had claimed from a border village during a summit was not a footnote in his story. She was running her own chapters with considerable efficiency and no particular interest in being underestimated. Marmon learned that she made tea at midnight when she was working through a problem, and that she talked through documents out loud sometimes, in a low murmur that he found completely absorbing, and that she could read a room in 12 seconds and give him a more accurate assessment of it than his senior advisor could produce in 40 minutes, and that when she laughed, really laughed, at the full and unguarded version she had been rationing for 26 years, it was the most accurate thing he had ever heard. She learned that he was exactly as good at politics as he looked from the outside, and slightly more tired of it than he showed, and that his wolf was genuinely delighted by her, and expressed this in ways that were dignified approximately 40% of the time. She learned that he had mornings where he hadn't figured out who he was yet, same as he had told her, and that on those mornings the best thing was to bring him tea and sit in the same room not talking, which she was extremely well suited to. She learned that being known by someone, completely, specifically, precisely known, did not make her smaller. It made her the most herself she had ever been. One evening, many months after the birch grove, she was at her desk in the archive when he found her, still working, candle burning low, ink on 3 fingers. He leaned in the doorway the way he had leaned against the tree line in the grove, present, careful, waiting. She looked up. "You're doing that thing," he said. "Which thing? Where you've been working for 5 hours and you think you haven't been, and your tea is cold, and you're frowning at a record that you've read 6 times. She looked at the tea. It was, in fact, cold. "I'm finishing this. You said that an hour ago. It's a more accurate statement now." He crossed the room, leaned down, yet read the record over her shoulder for a moment. "The seal on that one is wrong," he said. "3rd quadrant." She looked. He was right. She made a note in the margin. "How did you see that?" she said. "I've been watching you work for 8 months. You pick up the things that matter to you. It starts to matter to me, too." She set down her pen. She thought about a woman who had sat at a desk in a small cottage in a border town, copying other people's records, building a life in the margins, decalling herself free in the way that people call things free when they have accepted the walls around them so completely that they've stopped noticing the walls. She was free now. Not because the walls had been removed, because she had walked through them, with her own feet, on her own terms, and someone had been standing on the other side, not because she needed him there, but because he had chosen to be, and she had chosen to let him. "Come home," he said. She closed the ledger, blew out the candle, let him take her hand. "No one can know about tonight," she said, because it was theirs and she liked having something that was entirely theirs. He squeezed her hand. "Everyone can know about tonight." She had spent her whole life hiding in the margins of other people's stories. It turned out she had only been waiting to write her own.